If you ever find yourself with a PhD and working in Half-Life's Black Mesa, I want you to take a little stroll to this room and turn off this light switch. Someone at Valve actually programmed this scientist to comment on your behavior.
My God, what are you doing?
Walk over to the switch and actually turn the lights back on. That to me feels immersive. It feels realistic. But if you go to this exact same room in Half-Life's remake, Black Mesa, you'll find a shelf blocking the light switch. Despite this game having better graphics and more detail, this feels less immersive. And that really got me thinking, what actually makes a game feel realistic? So I'd like to compare Half-Life to its remake, because in an era where a computer can basically just add details on command, I want to see what details you actually need to add and why intentional human design is what is necessary to make something realistic. And I've broken it out into 5 different ways that Half-Life and Black Mesa handle realism in their game design. The biggest way to make a game world feel fake is by having it be static. The original Half-Life doesn't have the luxury of adding just a ton of detail due to hardware limitations, and it instead focuses on adding interaction to the world as much as possible, although both Half-Life and Black Mesa are full of these tiny interactions. In Half-Life 1's version of Office Complex, this vending machine can be smashed and cockroaches will come crawling out. You can even step on them and crush them, which leaves a blood splatter on the ground. In Black Mesa, this exact same vending machine is completely indestructible. In the bathroom, the player can turn on the air dryer in both versions of the game. But in Black Mesa, it gets an extra little particle effect that makes it seem like it's actually blowing. I think the computers in both versions are also really interesting. In the original Half-Life, they look like high-tech laptops, but they don't respond to the player at all. Black Mesa is the same way. Most computers don't respond. However, there are a couple with like a Black Mesa loading screen, and those do respond to the player. There's also a lot more visual variety to each of the screens in Black Mesa, and it really feels like this UI is directly out of the 2000s. I think it's Windows 95. It looks like, or at least it's inspired by Windows 95. Another thing that Black Mesa does really cool is that when you actually shoot the monitors in the game, it actually sparks and cracks and, has physics applied to it, which is really cool. Adding interactions to the game is basically saying yes to the player. Sure, the glass will realistically shatter when you shoot it, but what else can you do? By saying yes to the player, you encourage them to interact with the world and play around a lot more. Which means, as a developer, you need to add more and more details to the game to accommodate that playstyle. And since you realistically can only add so many interactions, you're eventually going to hit a point where the game says yes to the player sometimes and says no to them at other times, which doesn't always feel realistic. I really don't envy the position that Crowbar Collective was in, but the extra interactions really do help with the vibe of this game. But for example, does adding a head crab to the oven really make the game more realistic? I think it's little interactions like this that are super fun and make video games feel great and not like a glorified dollhouse. But I think interactions can really only get you so far for realism. To make something feel realistic, it needs to match our expectations of the real world. Accuracy in video games is difficult to balance. This is stupid, I'm not doing that bit. I think that's why saying video game realism is honestly kind of a buzzword. Video games are inherently fake and can only be realistic to a certain point. But I think we're obsessed with video game realism because it's really cool when it gets those small details right. Even if it's not perfectly accurate, it feels right. However, even if the game doesn't simulate the real world perfectly, we still expect some kind of internal logic for the game to follow. And when it does follow that logic, that's when something feels realistic. And so accuracy in Half-Life and Black Mesa to me is more about accurately simulating basic rules as we expect them to happen. Let me give you some examples. In Black Mesa, I really love how they added like ice and mist around the nitrogen leaks. I tried to find a comparable image to a real world nitrogen leak, and this is close as I could find, but see, the visual design of this just feels correct. One of the big pushes that Gabe Newell had on the first game is making sure that bullets actually leave a hole in the wall. Wow, so cool. It's super common in games today, but it wasn't a standard when Half-Life came out. I'm not saying they started it, but it wasn't the standard. And also, Black Mesa has bullet holes as well. Guns don't work underwater in both games, and in Black Mesa they added a muzzle flash, which again just feels more realistic. Despite these glowing vats of radiation not exactly being realistic, I think it's really cool that when you go near it in Black Mesa, your screen gets a little bit of visual noise. It's little stuff like this though that I just love about video games because that's not realistic. The visual noise that you see only happens on like cameras because of the gamma waves that hit the sensor, I think. Gordon's eyes aren't exactly a camera sensor, and it's just stuff like that that makes it feel more realistic, even if it isn't actually realistic or accurate. Other times though, video games get details wrong because we're human and we make mistakes. The calendar in Half-Life 1 doesn't make any sense. Black Mesa has managed to perfect calendar technology, but it has committed an even greater crime. If you have young children in the room, you might want to cover their eyes and ears. Look at this periodic table of elements. Do you see this? I can't even believe I have to say this. These elements haven't even officially been discovered when this game came out. With this last one, Oganesson, not even being officially named until 2016. My immersion is shattered and this game is ruined. Small details like that are really funny because it just shows that I mean, we make mistakes. I'm sure someone working on the game just grabbed a modern periodic table, and honestly, it's about getting the vibe right. Periodic table belongs in the science room, and that's really all that matters. But I think accuracy is really cool because if they did get something right, it's like, oh, that's neat. But if you get it wrong, it's like, the game is still really fun. But I also think there's times where accuracy is sacrificed for a better gameplay experience. And I think there's no better example than HECU Marines. The HCU Marines wear a mishmash of white and gray camo, but they were specifically designed so that they're actually easier to see on lower end monitors. Realistically, it doesn't make any sense, but it makes for a better gameplay experience. Combat with these guys is really interesting because they actually use tactics to hunt down Gordon. So then it makes the player feel like they're actually fighting against competent humans. Another cool detail that makes the Marines feel realistic is that their dialogue actually can adapt on the fly. The game sorts basically a bunch of different audio files that are just one word and then can string them together to form coherent sentences. And one thing that also makes the game feel more like it's accurately simulating combat is that enemies don't always just attack the player. They'll have infighting with each other. Marines will attack aliens, aliens will attack aliens. It makes it feel like this invasion is actually happening. Realism can look like a lot of things, and sometimes it's just as simple as having the bodies stay on the floor when you kill them. And this happens in both Half-Life and Black Life. Black Life. It happens in both Half-Life and Black Mesa. And I think Black Mesa takes this detail just a step further by having blood pulled out of the bodies depending on how they land on the ground. And all of these provide atmosphere to the game. And great atmosphere is one of the most important things a game can do. If accuracy is about matching our expectations of the real world, atmosphere is about selling the tone of the game. Half-Life and Black Mesa both handle atmosphere differently. Half-Life, again, is limited by hardware, so it uses a lot of baked lighting to provide contrast to a scene. Black Mesa also uses pre-baked lighting, but it also makes a lot of adjustments to make each area feel more atmospheric. And I think there's no better example than this elevator sequence. In the original, it's really cool, but it feels very video gamey. It's almost like something that you would see in a Mario level. But Black Mesa elevated this experience to actually feel more cinematic. And that's why I want to focus on how Black Mesa made this simple section feel more realistic. When you first walk in, you'll notice this room has a lot more details. There's a security room, there's a lot more damage everywhere, and you can't just turn on the elevator immediately. First, you'll need to break into the security room and actually turn on the power. Then when you finally turn on the elevator, this happens. You see, I think this elevates the experience and makes it feel more realistic than it did before. And this is an example where adding more details does make it feel more realistic, but game developers need to be intentional about it. And in the freezer section of the game, there's dimmer lighting and more fog, which I think just makes things feel creepier here. Visual contrast, I think, is one of the easiest ways that a game can just make a scene go from being flat to looking really cool. But I don't want to discredit the original Half-Life. There are a lot of scenes in this game that have incredible lighting. It was honestly impressive they were able to pull this off with such limited hardware. But that's the thing with Half-Life. When Half-Life 1 launched, it wasn't exactly a graphical powerhouse. It did a lot of cool things, but there were a lot of games from 1998 that just looked better. Half-Life just looks, though, so intentional, even though the graphics are honestly kind of cartoonish at times, but I think it feels real because of the atmosphere this game has. Atmosphere can also come from emotions, and Half-Life wants players to feel a little bit of fear. Climbing around these vents with only the spotlight of your flashlight is honestly pretty immersive. And the way the headcrabs are positioned to jump out at you if you're not careful encourages players to tread carefully. Like, how many of you were actually scared to go into these vents when you were younger? But since this is a video about realism, I do think it's important to talk about the visual scene as a whole, and some areas in Half-Life 1 just feel a little bit empty. But in Black Mesa, these spots have added a lot of small details to make these areas feel like real places. For example, this cafeteria, you can see how these extra elements like signs, an actual kitchen, and tables everywhere sell this place as a real space. Set pieces can only get you so far though, and I think what connects people to a game is people, believable people. The story in these games also feels realistic because the game is told entirely from Gordon's perspective. Oftentimes, there's very little delineation between what is a gameplay segment and what is a cutscene, outside of a couple of outliers in the Resonant Cascade segment. In the original game, scientists and guards quip with each other fairly often, but it's kind of obvious that it's not specific to any environment. This same thing also happens in Black Mesa, but there's a lot more scene-specific dialogue that didn't exist in the first game. Some examples that I really love are how the guard here actually tells the player about the headcrab who latched onto his friend's head. The scientists here do a better job of warning Gordon to not hit the lasers during the turret section. These all help the player progress or provide little small flavor text, but I think to make a character feel realistic, they need to have motivations, wants, and desires. And I think Black Mesa does a better job of humanizing its characters. At the beginning of the game, scientists actually bet on whether or not Gordon would show up to work, which feels like these guys have worked together for a long time.
Oh, would you look at that? Freeman actually did show up for work this morning. Looks like somebody here owes me lunch.
Well, good morning, Freeman.
Another great example is this scientist who talks about wanting to take vacation after working hard for so many years.
I've got 2 PhDs and an Ørsted medal, yet I find myself doing work best suited for an intern. That tears it. I'm going to check with the office upstairs and see how many vacation days I've accrued over the past 25 years. It's high time I took a break from all this.
And it almost makes you feel sad for him, considering what's about to happen. I think that's what I love about adding details to NPCs. Instead of just being text that you just consume and, spit out when you're done with it, basically, you can now actually have an emotional response to it. On a lighter note, you can actually hand the scientist who's in the bathroom toilet paper now, which is pretty funny.
Oh, thank heavens. I'm in dire need of some toilet paper.
I also appreciate how Black Mesa integrated female scientists into the game as well. Story moments also were great at selling the horror of the situation as well. When you reach the elevator after the event happens, you hear this.
Get us the hell out of here! Help us!
The original kind of makes it feel more comedic. Black Mesa just feels more realistic and kind of haunting in a way. The moments stuck with me way more in Black Mesa than it did in the original. Black Mesa also adds in these radios, which provides extra story about how people on the surface are responding to disaster. I also think the remake does a better job of setting up the HECU soldiers as being hostile. In the original game, I don't think it's as clear that they're shooting the scientists right away. Maybe I'm just stupid, but it didn't come across as strong had I not already known that they were hostile. But in the remake, the area you stand in, you can clearly see the entirety of the environment. You see the scientists running down the stairs. You see them run over only to get shot by the soldiers. And instead of the soldiers being immediately hostile to the player then has the opportunity to make the first move. I think it's very rare for a remake to make so many intentional changes and not make it feel like it's sacrificing what made the original great. Thankfully, Half-Life 1 and Black Mesa are both really good video games, but they both have different approaches to narrative design. And to illustrate that point, I want to show the same scene from both games to see their differences. Half-Life tries to keep these moments short and sweet without much flair.
Well, so much for the government. Their idea of containment is to kill everyone associated with the project. Judging from your hazard suit, I'd say you were part of what went wrong. Is that right?
There's honestly nothing wrong with this approach. It's a lot simpler, and honestly, in a situation like this, there's not going to be much flair. These people are under a lot of stress. In Black Mesa's version of the scene feels a lot more dynamic, but a little more theatrical.
Well, so much for the government. Their idea of containment is to kill everyone associated with the project. If anyone can end this catastrophe, it's the science team in the Lambda complex at the opposite end of the base. I couldn't tell you how to get there.
What the scientist does feels less robotic, but also kind of feels like an actor performing in a stage play. None of these approaches are wrong, but I think it highlights how both games are different in narrative and game design. And it's really funny because they both feel completely realistic and fake for the opposite reasons. But now it's time for the final test, to see if each game's AI can make me believe that this world is real. Let's start with this guard here that you meet here right at the beginning.
Glad to see you. What the hell are these things? And why are they wearing science team uniforms? What?
So far he's not seeming that bad, but let's see how the Black Mesa guy did.
Let's see how you like this. Man, did you see that shot?
When fighting the HCU soldiers late into the game, I do think it's impressive how they don't just charge into you during a fight. They tend to run out and fire and duck behind cover, which encouraged me to do the same thing. Although sometimes they weren't always that smart. Players want to feel like they're fighting against a competent enemy rather than a robot bullet sponge. So realism in this instance is just another gameplay enhancement. Overall, I found the AI to actually be pretty smart in both games. It made me feel like I had approached each combat scenario differently. That's the thing about realism. The more you try and chase it, the farther away you seem to be from it. But ultimately, it's good game design and level design that draws us in. And I feel like that good level design made me feel like I was in this universe, actually ducking around corners and shooting enemies. And that is what realism should be, a feeling.
Video complete.